The 20th century witnessed a revolution in photography, not just as a tool to document reality, but as a weapon to shape perception. Photographs, long assumed to be unbiased records of events, became instruments of manipulation in the hands of powerful regimes. From the rise of totalitarian governments to the propaganda machines of wartime nations, images were deliberately constructed, staged, or altered to craft a narrative that suited those in control. These were not mere snapshots, they were carefully curated stories designed to influence minds and control societies. One of the most striking examples of this manipulation can be found in the Soviet Union under Stalin. Photographs from this era frequently show smiling workers, triumphant soldiers, and triumphant industrial achievements, creating the impression of a society thriving under socialism. Yet behind these images, the reality was starkly different. Political purges, widespread famine, and forced labor camps were deliberately obscured. Photographers were often instructed to remove enemies of the state from images, effectively rewriting history through the lens of a camera. In many surviving photographs, the faces of those who fell out of favor with Stalin were meticulously erased, leaving gaps that today serve as haunting reminders of both the manipulation and the individuals who disappeared from public memory. A similar strategy was employed in Nazi Germany, where the regime understood the psychological power of imagery. Photographers were deployed to capture scenes that glorified the Aryan ideal, portraying Germany as orderly, prosperous, and racially pure. Crowds at rallies, marching soldiers, and idealized family scenes were designed to convey strength and unity. Meanwhile, images of persecution, ghettos, and concentration camps were strictly censored, creating a stark contrast between the world presented to the public and the hidden horrors of the regime. Some photographs were even staged to exaggerate military victories or minimize the suffering of those affected by the war. These images did more than deceive, they became central to the myths that the regime built around itself, and many persisted in collective memory long after the war ended. World War propaganda offers another lens into the weaponization of photography. During both World Wars, nations recognized that the camera could inspire patriotism, demonize the enemy, and conceal inconvenient truths. In World War I, photographs were often posed, with soldiers arranged in heroic stances and battlefield destruction selectively framed to emphasize bravery over horror. Newspapers printed these images to boost morale at home, masking the true brutality of trench warfare, disease, and starvation. By the time World War II arrived, these techniques had become even more sophisticated. Newsreels, magazines, and official publications carefully edited photographs to highlight victories, obscure failures, and glorify leaders. In many cases, photojournalists were restricted in what they could capture or required to follow strict guidelines, blurring the line between documentation and propaganda. Beyond political regimes, the manipulation of photography extended to social movements and public opinion campaigns. Governments and influential organizations understood that a single compelling image could shift public perception dramatically. For example, certain photographs of famine, disease, or social unrest were either withheld or released strategically, shaping narratives to suit economic, political, or ideological objectives. In some cases, images were altered to exaggerate suffering or conceal complicity, demonstrating the profound control wielded by those who determined which photographs would be seen and which would remain hidden. Even technological innovations in photography contributed to this ability to manipulate reality. Early retouching techniques, double exposures, and later darkroom alterations allowed for unprecedented control over what a photograph depicted. While the public largely trusted photography as a transparent medium, these subtle interventions were powerful tools for creating myths, erasing inconvenient truths, and crafting heroes or villains as desired. The result was a century in which visual evidence could no longer be taken at face value, requiring viewers to question the authenticity and intent behind every image. Yet, the power of photography also lay in its subtlety. The most effective manipulations were often nearly invisible. A background removed, a smile enhanced, a scene framed to exclude suffering, all these small adjustments shaped perception without alerting the viewer. Unlike overt censorship, these images operated silently, convincing audiences of a reality that never existed. They were persuasive because they appeared real, blending truth and fabrication so seamlessly that generations would grow up with skewed understandings of historical events. The consequences of this manipulation extend far beyond the political sphere. Entire generations internalized distorted narratives of war, leadership, and national identity, guided by images that presented an idealized or sanitized version of reality. By studying these photographs today, we are offered a glimpse into both the artifice of the past and the human desire to control perception through visual storytelling. They reveal not just the events themselves, but the intentions behind how those events were presented, reminding us that photographs are as much about who is telling the story as they are about the story itself. In this light, 20th-century photography becomes a lens into the psychology of power, propaganda, and perception. It forces viewers to confront uncomfortable truths, that what we see may not always be real, and that the camera, far from being a neutral observer, can become a silent accomplice in rewriting history. By uncovering these hidden manipulations, we begin to understand the broader cultural and political narratives that shaped the century, and we recognize the enduring responsibility to look beyond the surface of an image and question the story it tells. While the manipulation of high-profile images shaped public perception on a grand scale, a subtler form of deception often existed in photographs that appeared to capture everyday life. Many images from the 20th century present scenes of ordinary routines, work, or leisure, conveying a sense of normalcy and stability. Yet, behind these seemingly innocuous pictures lie hidden horrors, masked suffering, and stories deliberately excluded from view. By examining these photographs closely, we uncover the tension between what societies wanted the world to see and the reality experienced by millions of ordinary people. Consider images of urban life during the Great Depression. Newspapers and magazines frequently depicted bustling streets, cheerful shoppers, and productive laborers, creating the impression that society continued to function smoothly despite economic collapse. Yet, rare photographs that survived from the same era show the stark contrast: families living in makeshift shantytowns, children scavenging for food, and men waiting in long breadlines, their faces etched with despair. These images were often suppressed or selectively published, because they challenged the comforting narrative that governments and media outlets wished to project. The everyday life captured in popular publications told one story, while the hidden reality told another, a story of poverty, desperation, and systemic failure that was far from invisible to those who lived it. Labor camps, industrial sites, and rural communities offer similar examples. Photographers were frequently directed to capture images that suggested efficiency, prosperity, or contentment among workers, yet the lived reality was often grueling. In factories, mines, and plantations, workers faced long hours, dangerous conditions, and minimal pay. Photographs that showed smiling laborers often concealed exhausted, injured, or malnourished individuals standing just out of frame. In rural areas, crops failing due to drought, floods, or mismanagement were rarely photographed for public consumption. Instead, images emphasized vibrant harvests and happy families, masking the widespread suffering and human cost behind these economic or environmental disasters. The selective framing of daily life created a dual reality, leaving future generations with an incomplete understanding of these critical historical periods. The manipulation of ordinary life extended beyond labor and poverty into the realm of social control and moral perception. Governments and institutions frequently staged images of order, health, and civility to maintain social stability or reinforce particular ideologies. For instance, photographs of public schools, hospitals, and urban streets were often edited or carefully staged to suggest cleanliness, progress, and obedience. In reality, overcrowding, disease, and neglect were pervasive. By presenting these idealized versions of everyday life, authorities not only misled the public but also shaped expectations of behavior and compliance, subtly influencing social norms without the need for overt coercion. The tension between image and reality becomes even more striking when examining photographs of marginalized communities. Ethnic minorities, immigrants, and impoverished populations were frequently depicted through a lens of exoticism, moral judgment, or pity, rather than authenticity. Photographers and editors framed these groups in ways that reinforced stereotypes or obscured their humanity. Rare candid images that escape the editorial gaze often reveal families living in precarious conditions, children working instead of attending school, and communities struggling to survive under systemic discrimination. The selective presentation of ordinary life thus becomes a tool for maintaining social hierarchies, hiding the suffering of the majority while elevating the narratives of a few. Even in seemingly neutral or leisure-oriented images, the truth was often distorted. Photographs of parks, playgrounds, and suburban streets were frequently curated to convey safety, prosperity, and happiness, masking the social tensions and inequalities that permeated these spaces. In urban centers, images of busy cafes, bustling markets, or well-dressed citizens concealed the widespread poverty, crime, and hardship that lay nearby. These photographs suggest a society thriving, when in fact countless individuals faced daily struggles invisible to the public eye. The camera, while ostensibly documenting reality, was complicit in constructing illusions of normalcy. Photographs of disasters or crises further illustrate this divide between appearance and reality. Famines, epidemics, and social unrest were often documented in ways that emphasize drama or heroism rather than human suffering. Images of relief efforts, for example, were framed to show aid workers in control, helping grateful victims, while many suffering individuals remained unseen or unrecorded. The stories of the majority, the most vulnerable, the most affected, were frequently excluded. What the public saw reinforced narratives of competence, progress, or moral righteousness, while the hidden photographs told a very different story of desperation, neglect, and human endurance. The cumulative effect of these manipulations was profound. By presenting only curated slices of everyday life, photographs shaped the collective memory of entire generations. They established norms of what normal looked like, what success or happiness should appear to be, and which lives mattered. These images constructed a visual mythology in which hardships were minimized, suffering was sanitized, and inconvenient truths were conveniently left out. Only now, with the rediscovery and preservation of rare, unaltered photographs, can we glimpse the complexity and tragedy of ordinary existence in the 20th century. Studying these hidden realities allows us to reassess our understanding of history. It reveals that the stories of ordinary people, workers, children, families, and the marginalized, were often excluded from mainstream narratives. It also underscores the role of photography not merely as a documentary medium, but as a tool of persuasion, control, and selective storytelling. The images that have endured in public memory often represent an idealized version of life rather than its lived reality, requiring modern viewers to critically evaluate both the content and context of historical photographs. By uncovering these hidden truths, we begin to understand that history is not only written by the victors but also framed by the lenses through which we view it. The ordinary life portrayed in photographs is rarely ordinary at all. It is a carefully constructed version of reality, designed to influence perception, maintain social control, and hide the most uncomfortable truths. These photographs, whether depicting work, leisure, or domestic life, reveal a persistent tension between the reality of human experience and the images the world was allowed to see, offering a sobering reminder of the power and responsibility inherent in every photograph. Throughout the 20th century, iconic photographs of political leaders, celebrities, and influential figures became more than just documentation. They became instruments in shaping public perception, constructing myths, and sometimes hiding uncomfortable truths. The faces that dominated newspapers, magazines, and propaganda campaigns were rarely presented in an entirely honest light. Instead, images were carefully curated, retouched, or staged to craft a narrative that served specific agendas. What the public saw often diverged sharply from the reality behind the camera, creating illusions of power, virtue, or charisma that could persist for generations. Consider the photographs of world leaders during periods of intense political upheaval. Leaders such as Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler were photographed not only to record history but to control how history would remember them. In many cases, images were carefully orchestrated. Churchill posed in his iconic V for Victory gesture, his face conveying unyielding determination. Roosevelt was photographed seated in a wheelchair so as not to draw attention to his paralysis, creating a perception of vigor and authority. Stalin's propagandists frequently altered photographs to remove political rivals or enemies, ensuring that his image conveyed absolute dominance. These visual narratives were meticulously constructed, demonstrating how the manipulation of a single photograph could shape both contemporary perception and historical memory. The power of curated images extended beyond politics into the realm of celebrity culture, where photographs became a vehicle for crafting larger-than-life personas. Hollywood in the early to mid-20th century provides an illustrative example. Actors and actresses were photographed in highly controlled environments, their images edited to accentuate beauty, glamour, and desirability. Publicity stills rarely revealed the grueling working conditions, personal struggles, or backstage realities of their lives. In some cases, photographers even used lighting, angles, and retouching to alter appearances, creating an idealized version of a person that the audience would accept as reality. These images shaped the public's understanding of stardom and success, while concealing the imperfections, vulnerabilities, and hardships of the individuals behind the lens. Manipulation of iconic imagery also played a crucial role in constructing national and ideological myths. In times of war, political crisis, or social upheaval, carefully staged images of leaders and influential figures reinforced the narratives that those in power wished to promote. For example, photographs of soldiers alongside their commanders often conveyed loyalty, unity, and heroism, while moments of fear, dissent, or failure were rarely captured or distributed. The psychological effect was profound. The public internalized these idealized representations, developing emotional connections with figures who may have existed more as symbols than as actual people. This created a visual shorthand for courage, leadership, or moral authority, regardless of the complexities of reality. Retouching and selective framing were among the most subtle yet effective techniques used to manipulate these images. In Stalinist Russia, the removal of individuals from group photographs erased political enemies from public memory entirely. Entire chapters of history were visually rewritten. A person could be celebrated in one photograph and completely erased in the next, leaving only the illusion of an unbroken, harmonious leadership. Similarly, in Nazi Germany, photographers and editors manipulated images to emphasize strength, unity, and loyalty to the regime, while concealing dissent, suffering, and the human cost of oppressive policies. The public's understanding of these leaders was therefore filtered through a carefully constructed visual narrative, one that often bore little resemblance to reality. The manipulation of photographs also extended into the realm of miscaptioning or selective storytelling. Images could be entirely accurate in their composition yet misleading in context. A photograph of a smiling child outside a factory, for example, might be presented as evidence of prosperity and progress, when in reality the child could be working long hours under harsh conditions. Such discrepancies between image and reality underscore the necessity of critical analysis when interpreting iconic photographs, highlighting the tension between what is visible and what is intentionally hidden. Even seemingly candid images of influential figures were often carefully orchestrated. Photographers would capture moments that appeared spontaneous but were, in fact, highly directed. The positioning of hands, the gaze, the background, all were calculated to convey authority, compassion, or charisma. These visual cues shaped public perception on a subconscious level, reinforcing the desired narrative while leaving alternative interpretations invisible. The result was a sophisticated visual language, where subtle details communicated messages as powerfully as words, often influencing public opinion more profoundly than official speeches or written statements. The consequences of these curated images extend far beyond the lives of the subjects themselves. By controlling how leaders, celebrities, and influential figures were portrayed, those in power shaped societal expectations, ideals, and values. Public trust, national identity, and collective memory were all molded through the lens of the camera. Generations grew up internalizing these images, developing perceptions of history, morality, and authority that were heavily mediated by carefully managed visual narratives. In this sense, photography was not merely a tool for recording events, it became an instrument of persuasion, myth-making, and ideological reinforcement. Yet, the manipulation of iconic figures also reveals a profound human desire to control perception and legacy. By curating appearances, erasing inconvenient truths, and amplifying desirable traits, those in power sought to project stability, strength, and virtue. At the same time, the public's fascination with these figures created a feedback loop. The more carefully constructed the image, the more influential it became. Photographs became a means of shaping not only contemporary opinion but the historical record itself, illustrating how profoundly visual media can influence collective consciousness. Studying these images today offers both insight and caution. We can see the techniques used to craft public personas, understand the gap between appearance and reality, and recognize the role of photography in shaping cultural, political, and social narratives. These photographs remind us that what appears self-evident may be carefully engineered, that charisma, heroism, or virtue in an image may tell as much about the intentions of the photographer as about the subject. They challenge us to question the stories we have inherited and to remain vigilant in distinguishing between the mythologized and the actual, between the constructed image and the lived reality behind it. By uncovering the hidden truths in these photographs, we gain a deeper understanding of both the individuals portrayed and the societies that consumed these images. We begin to see that the public image of iconic figures was rarely a straightforward reflection of reality, but rather a carefully curated narrative designed to influence perception, shape ideology, and reinforce power structures. In doing so, we not only rethink our understanding of the past but also develop a critical lens for examining the images that continue to shape our world today. War has always been a subject of fascination, horror, and myth-making, and photography became one of the most potent tools for shaping public perception of conflict during the 20th century. Images from the front lines, ostensibly captured to record reality, were often carefully curated, staged, or censored to fit a particular narrative. What appeared heroic, decisive, or noble in photographs frequently concealed chaos, fear, and immense human suffering. By examining these images closely, we uncover the stark contrast between the mythology of war and the raw, often unrecorded realities experienced by soldiers and civilians alike. World War I provides a compelling starting point. Photography at the time was still developing as a medium, and yet it became an essential part of the propaganda apparatus. Soldiers were often posed in heroic stances, with mud-streaked uniforms cleaned or arranged to suggest order and bravery. Images of trench warfare were carefully framed to emphasize courage over despair, while the reality of disease, starvation, and psychological trauma was largely absent from public view. Some photographs were even retouched to remove dead bodies or convey a sense of disciplined victory. While these images reinforced national pride and morale, they distorted the lived experience of the millions trapped in the trenches, creating a sanitized version of war that would persist in collective memory. The interwar period and the rise of totalitarian regimes further refined these techniques. In Nazi Germany, war photography was an essential component of the state's propaganda machine. Photographers were instructed to highlight triumphs, conceal setbacks, and craft images that portrayed the German army as invincible. Soldiers marching in perfect formation, civilians celebrating victory, and leaders exuding confidence became recurring motifs. Meanwhile, photographs of the devastation caused by bombing campaigns, civilian casualties, and the horrors inflicted upon occupied populations were suppressed or manipulated. The contrast between what was shown and what was hidden created a powerful illusion. The nation appeared unified, victorious, and morally justified, while the true cost of war remained largely invisible to the public. World War II expanded the reach and impact of war photography even further. Newsreels, print media, and magazines became global conduits for imagery, shaping perceptions not just nationally, but internationally. Iconic photographs from the Normandy landings, the liberation of concentration camps, and the Pacific Theater became embedded in historical consciousness. Yet even these famous images were often carefully framed to emphasize certain elements while excluding others. Photographs of liberated prisoners, for instance, were sometimes staged to highlight heroism or hope, masking the ongoing suffering of those still trapped in camps or the overwhelming scale of death that could not be captured in a single frame. The selective nature of these images shaped how the world understood the war, emphasizing certain narratives while obscuring others. Vietnam further illustrates the complex interplay between photography, perception, and reality. In this conflict, images became both a tool of propaganda and a source of shocking revelation. Photographs depicting battle scenes, suffering civilians, and the effects of chemical warfare revealed truths that governments often preferred to conceal. At the same time, some images were misrepresented, miscaptioned, or staged to provoke emotional responses or shape public opinion. The media's reliance on photographic evidence created a new dynamic. Images could both expose the brutal realities of war and be manipulated to fit ideological agendas. The result was a conflict in which photographs became central to shaping domestic and international understanding, blurring the line between documentation and narrative construction. Censorship and control played critical roles in this process. Military authorities, government officials, and editors often restricted which photographs were published, carefully curating the visual story presented to the public. Images of fear, confusion, or defeat were minimized or withheld entirely, while moments of bravery, camaraderie, or strategic success were emphasized. The psychological impact of this curation was profound. The public internalized an image of war that was orderly, heroic, and morally righteous, even when the reality was chaotic, terrifying, and morally ambiguous. In many cases, the absence of certain images was as powerful as the presence of others, shaping perception through selective visibility. The technology of photography itself also influenced what was captured and shared. Early cameras and film imposed practical limitations, long exposure times, bulky equipment, and the difficulty of developing images in the field meant that photographers often staged or carefully framed scenes. Later advancements in portable cameras and faster film allowed for more spontaneous documentation, yet censorship and editorial control continued to mediate the final product. Even candid images were often the result of deliberate positioning, lighting, and composition, demonstrating that the act of photographing war was never entirely neutral. Beyond the battlefield, photographs also shaped perceptions of home front experiences. Images of women working in factories, families rationing food, or civilians supporting the war effort conveyed resilience and unity. However, these photographs frequently downplayed fear, loss, and social tension. By presenting an idealized vision of civilian life during wartime, governments and media reinforced national narratives while obscuring the hardships endured by ordinary people. The duality between heroic or sanitized images and the harsh, unseen realities underscores a central tension in war photography. It documents reality while simultaneously shaping it, influencing how history is remembered and understood. The cumulative effect of these curated and manipulated images was profound. They established myths of heroism, valor, and moral clarity, while concealing suffering, failure, and moral ambiguity. Generations grew up absorbing these visual narratives, internalizing the idea that war could be understood through a lens of order and righteousness rather than chaos and complexity. Yet the discovery of hidden, rare, or censored photographs now allows historians and the public to reassess these myths, revealing the human cost, the fear, and the moral contradictions that official imagery sought to erase. Studying war photography from the 20th century teaches an essential lesson: images are powerful, but they are not inherently truthful. Each photograph is a product of choices: what to include, what to exclude, how to frame, and how to present it. These choices shape perception, influence collective memory, and determine which stories endure. The photographs that survive, the ones widely circulated, and the ones hidden away together create a layered narrative that is both a record and a construction of history. By examining these images critically, we gain insight into the nature of war itself, not just the battles, strategies, or outcomes, but the human experience of fear, courage, and survival that lies beyond the camera's frame. Ultimately, 20th-century war photography reveals a paradox: it simultaneously documents reality and constructs myth. The heroic images, the staged victories, and the carefully framed suffering all serve to shape perception, obscure inconvenient truths, and convey ideological narratives. Yet the hidden, rare, or censored images that have recently emerged provide a counterpoint, exposing the brutal realities, the human cost, and the moral complexity of conflict. Together, these photographs offer a richer, more nuanced understanding of war, reminding us that the stories we inherit are always filtered through the lens of those who wield the camera, and that the truth often lies in what was left unseen. Long before the age of social media, photographs in newspapers, magazines, postcards, and public exhibitions played a similar role in shaping public opinion, spreading ideas, and constructing narratives. In the early to mid-20th century, these images functioned as powerful tools for influencing society, creating perceptions, and even rewriting history. Yet, much like today's viral content, what was shown was often curated, staged, or selectively edited, while countless stories remained hidden. Understanding this pre-social media era of photography reveals how visual culture influenced public consciousness, often shaping beliefs about society, morality, and identity without the audience ever realizing it. The editorial process played a significant role in shaping these narratives. Photographs submitted by journalists or amateur photographers were rarely published without review. Editors and publishers decided which images would make it to the public, often guided by political, commercial, or ideological motives. Images that supported prevailing narratives or presented a favorable impression of a country, institution, or social group were amplified, while those that challenged authority, exposed hardship, or contradicted dominant myths were suppressed. For instance, photographs depicting urban poverty or labor unrest were often replaced with images of bustling streets, happy workers, or orderly neighborhoods, creating the illusion of stability and prosperity. The selective curation of images not only shaped perception but also created a visual hierarchy, where some lives and experiences were amplified while others were rendered invisible. Advertising and consumer culture further illustrate the manipulation of photography in everyday life. Magazines and print media often presented an idealized version of society: suburban homes with perfectly arranged interiors, families smiling in immaculate parks, and products promising happiness, health, or social status. These images created aspirations that were largely unattainable for the average person, yet they became benchmarks of normal life. The contrast between reality and the polished imagery was rarely acknowledged, masking struggles such as economic inequality, social tension, or domestic hardship. In this way, early 20th century photography performed a dual function: it documented the world, but it also manufactured a vision of life that served both commercial and ideological purposes. Postcards, one of the most widespread mediums of photography during this period, offer another perspective on the construction of reality. Scenes of cities, landmarks, and public events were often staged or enhanced to emphasize grandeur, civility, and national pride. Everyday hardships, crowded tenements, street crime, or labor disputes, were intentionally omitted, creating a sanitized version of urban life. Even images of war or disaster were selectively curated. Postcards depicting battlefields or ruins often framed destruction in a dramatic but visually digestible way, softening the human suffering involved. By circulating these images widely, societies reinforced collective ideals and omitted inconvenient truths, subtly shaping the way citizens imagined their own world. Rare or unpublished photographs provide a stark contrast to this curated imagery. Hidden archives, personal collections, and rediscovered negatives reveal the lives, struggles, and resistance of those usually omitted from mainstream narratives. These images show street vendors laboring under harsh conditions, children playing amidst rubble, and communities navigating social or political oppression. Unlike the polished images disseminated through mass media, these photographs provide a more authentic, often uncomfortable perspective, revealing the true texture of everyday life. They remind us that the curated photographs people consumed were often only a fraction of reality, selected to craft a story rather than document it fully. Social movements also relied on photography to shape public perception, much like modern campaigns use viral images and memes. Early 20th century reformers, activists, and suffragettes understood the power of the camera to convey a message, whether to generate sympathy, outrage, or solidarity. Yet even these images were filtered through editorial control and societal expectations. Photographs of protests, strikes, or marginalized communities were frequently cropped, captioned, or framed to elicit specific reactions, highlighting heroism or victimhood while downplaying complexity or nuance. In this way, photography became a tool not just for recording events but for directing emotional and intellectual engagement with society's most pressing issues. The tension between staged images and raw reality also extended to reportage. Photojournalists traveling to document disasters, industrial accidents, or social unrest often faced constraints imposed by editors, governments, or local authorities. Photographs that were too shocking, critical, or politically sensitive were withheld, while those that reinforced desired narratives were promoted. For example, images from famine-stricken regions might focus on orderly aid distribution rather than the chaotic suffering experienced by the majority. Similarly, photographs of industrial workers might show them in neat uniforms and controlled settings, masking the hazardous conditions and exhaustion that defined their daily lives. By controlling which images reached the public, authorities and media outlets shaped not just perception but societal memory. Even seemingly candid photographs from everyday events, parades, sporting matches, or cultural celebrations, were carefully composed to convey particular messages. The arrangement of crowds, the framing of monuments, or the positioning of leaders and participants all contributed to a narrative of order, pride, or national identity. These images reinforced existing hierarchies, values, and expectations, subtly influencing public understanding of the world. By learning to read between the lines of these curated photographs, modern viewers can uncover the hidden social and political dynamics of the period. In essence, the photographs of the early 20th century functioned as both documentation and propaganda, capturing reality while simultaneously shaping it. The images that reached the public were rarely neutral, they were mediated, curated, and strategically deployed to reinforce specific narratives. By examining the rare, unpublished, or rediscovered photographs from this era, we gain access to the hidden stories of ordinary people, social struggles, and political tensions that were deliberately obscured. These images remind us that photography, even before the age of social media, was a powerful tool for crafting perception, shaping public opinion, and controlling the way history was remembered. Disasters, both natural and human-made, left profound marks on the 20th century, and the way they were photographed played a critical role in shaping public understanding. Images of famine, industrial accidents, epidemics, and political catastrophes became symbols, often sanitized or staged to convey controlled narratives. While photographs hold the power to reveal suffering, they were frequently used to manipulate perception, highlight heroism, or suppress uncomfortable truths. Examining these images closely uncovers the gap between what the public was shown and what truly transpired during some of history's most devastating events. Consider the photographs of famines, such as the devastating famine in Ukraine during the early 1930s. While some images were published, often they presented the crisis in a manner that minimized its severity or framed it as a manageable hardship. The suffering of millions, the widespread death, and the collapse of communities were largely hidden from the international public through selective photography and censorship. Photographers were restricted in their access or instructed to avoid certain areas, and the images that did circulate emphasized resilience and perseverance rather than despair. By controlling which aspects of the catastrophe were visible, authorities shaped both domestic and international perception, fostering a sense of order and stability even amid catastrophe. Industrial disasters provide another lens on manipulation. Accidents in factories, mines, or chemical plants were frequently photographed, but images were carefully framed to downplay casualties, unsafe working conditions, or corporate negligence. For instance, photographs of collapsed buildings, fires, or explosions were often edited or cropped to remove victims or evidence of poor safety measures. The resulting images suggested a controlled response and limited damage, concealing the broader impact on workers, families, and communities. These photographs served a dual purpose, documenting an event while protecting the reputation of industries, governments, or officials responsible for public safety. Natural disasters, such as hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes, also illustrate the selective nature of photographic documentation. Iconic images often captured dramatic destruction, with toppled buildings or flooded streets, yet many photographs omitted the human suffering occurring just beyond the frame. People clinging to debris, desperate families searching for food and shelter, and the invisible labor of emergency responders were frequently underrepresented or sanitized. By focusing on spectacle rather than lived experience, photographers and editors influenced public understanding, emphasizing narrative drama over the messy, ongoing human consequences of disaster. Political catastrophes, including revolutions, coups, and mass displacements, were also heavily mediated through photography. Governments often controlled which images were released to maintain power, shape ideology, or preserve public morale. Images of protests or uprisings, for example, were sometimes staged to emphasize control and order, minimizing the chaos, fear, and violence experienced by participants. Similarly, mass displacements or refugee crises were often photographed selectively, with editorial choices highlighting orderly relocation, successful aid distribution, or heroic intervention rather than the suffering and dislocation experienced by millions. In these cases, photographs were not just records of events, they were instruments of narrative construction, shaping how societies remembered crises long after they occurred. The Dust Bowl in the United States during the 1930s exemplifies this tension between reality and representation. Photographs that survive from this period, particularly those commissioned by government agencies like the Farm Security Administration, often highlight striking landscapes, resilient farmers, and community solidarity. Yet closer examination reveals the suffering that these images largely obscure: families forced to abandon homes, children suffering from malnutrition and illness, and economic devastation that disrupted lives for generations. While some of these photographs have become iconic representations of perseverance, they simultaneously mask the full scale of hardship, illustrating how even documentary photography can mediate reality through selective framing and presentation. The selective framing of disaster photography also extended to moments of human heroism. Photographs often emphasized relief efforts, rescue operations, or acts of bravery, shaping public perception to focus on human resilience rather than systemic failure or mismanagement. Firefighters, aid workers, and volunteers were photographed prominently, while governmental shortcomings, corporate negligence, or structural failures were largely invisible. These images reinforced narratives of competence, order, and moral authority, even in situations where suffering, miscommunication, and chaos dominated the lived experience. At the same time, some rare, unpublished, or rediscovered images provide a more complete view of these events, revealing the complexity, fear, and human cost that mainstream images often excluded. Photographs of overcrowded shelters, desperate families, and unrecorded casualties challenged the sanitized versions widely circulated, offering a fuller understanding of the impact disasters had on everyday life. By juxtaposing curated and hidden images, historians and viewers can better grasp both the reality of catastrophe and the mechanisms of visual manipulation that shaped public perception. Censorship and editorial control were central to this process. Photographers did not operate in a vacuum. Their work was influenced by government policies, media priorities, and social expectations. Images that could provoke panic, criticism, or moral outrage were often withheld, while those that reinforced a narrative of resilience, progress, or control were highlighted. This selective visibility not only shaped contemporary understanding but also influenced the historical record, leaving gaps in memory that only rare photographs and personal archives can now begin to fill. Ultimately, photographs of disasters in the 20th century reveal the dual nature of visual documentation. They can expose suffering, injustice, and human resilience, yet they can also conceal, manipulate, or reframe reality to serve ideological, political, or commercial purposes. Understanding these images requires careful attention to both what is shown and what is hidden, recognizing that the power of photography lies not only in its ability to record events, but in its capacity to construct narratives, control perception, and shape collective memory. By examining disaster photography critically, we gain a deeper understanding of the hidden stories behind public narratives. We see the lives of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, whose struggles were often obscured by the images presented to the world. These photographs challenge us to question the stories we inherit and to consider how visual media can both illuminate and obscure the truth. In doing so, they reveal the enduring tension between appearance and reality, reminding us that the camera can be as much a tool of deception as a recorder of history. While iconic photographs and staged depictions often dominated public narratives, an even more striking form of omission existed in images of marginalized communities. The lives of minorities, refugees, women, and laborers were frequently excluded or misrepresented in mainstream photography, leaving entire populations invisible in the historical record. By selectively framing images, editors and authorities reinforced social hierarchies, erasing the struggles, resilience, and humanity of these groups. Yet rare, surviving photographs now offer a glimpse into lives long hidden, providing a counternarrative to the sanitized and curated visions that dominated public consciousness. Ethnic minorities and immigrant communities, in particular, were often depicted through a lens of exoticism, pity, or moral judgment, rather than authenticity. Newspapers and magazines frequently published images that emphasized difference, portraying these populations as outsiders or as socially deviant, thereby reinforcing dominant societal norms. Street scenes featuring minority neighborhoods might be cropped or staged to accentuate perceived squalor or disorder, while positive aspects of daily life, children playing, families celebrating, artisans working, were ignored. The result was a distorted perception, where entire communities were defined by stereotypes rather than the fullness of their lived experiences. Refugees and displaced populations faced a similar invisibility. During wars, political purges, and social upheavals, millions of people were forced to flee their homes, often enduring harsh conditions in camps or temporary settlements. Yet photographs that circulated in mainstream media rarely captured the full scope of this suffering. Images were carefully chosen to emphasize orderly relocation, relief efforts, or the resilience of a few, while the majority of displaced individuals remained unseen. By presenting a controlled, partial narrative, authorities and media outlets could downplay the scale of displacement, minimize public sympathy, or obscure responsibility for the underlying causes of the crisis. Women's experiences were also frequently marginalized in photographic records. While images of men at work, soldiers in uniform, or political leaders were widely disseminated, photographs of women were often confined to domestic or ornamental roles. Even when women were active participants in social movements, labor, or wartime efforts, images often emphasized appearance, morality, or propriety over agency and contribution. Rare candid photographs reveal women navigating extraordinary challenges, working in factories, organizing relief efforts, or resisting oppression, but these images were seldom widely circulated. The selective representation of women in photography reinforced societal norms and limited public understanding of their full participation in historical events. Laborers, too, were often rendered invisible or sanitized in visual media. Photographs of factories, farms, or construction sites were frequently staged to emphasize productivity, order, and efficiency, masking hazardous working conditions, fatigue, or injury. Editorial choices favored heroic or idealized depictions of workers, framing them as content and industrious while obscuring the daily hardships they endured. By controlling which images reached the public, media and authorities could reinforce the illusion of social harmony and economic progress, hiding the inequalities and exploitation inherent in labor systems. The combined effect of these omissions was the creation of an invisible majority in photographic history, populations whose daily struggles, resistance, and resilience were systematically erased. By excluding marginalized groups from mainstream visual narratives, society reinforced social hierarchies, promoted conformity, and maintained power structures. The absence of these images is itself a form of storytelling, shaping collective memory by determining whose experiences are remembered and whose are forgotten. Yet the survival of rare photographs, personal collections, and rediscovered archives provides a powerful counter-narrative. Images of refugee children in makeshift shelters, minority families celebrating festivals, women working on assembly lines, and laborers enduring harsh conditions reveal lives that mainstream narratives omitted. These photographs humanize subjects who were previously reduced to statistics, stereotypes, or absence, offering a more authentic and complex view of 20th-century society. They remind us that history was not experienced solely by the figures celebrated in iconic images, but by millions of ordinary people whose stories were largely hidden from view. The invisibility of these groups also intersects with issues of censorship and editorial control. Photographers who attempted to document marginalized communities often faced restrictions, whether from governments, employers, or social pressures. Images that might provoke discomfort, highlight injustice, or challenge prevailing narratives were withheld, suppressed, or altered. Even the distribution of photographs could be limited, ensuring that only curated, sanitized, or ideologically aligned images reached the public. This control over visual representation reinforced existing power dynamics, making it difficult for marginalized voices to shape public perception or enter the historical record on their own terms. Moreover, the selective framing of marginalized communities extended to how history itself was remembered. Photographs are powerful tools for memory, shaping how societies understand the past. By excluding certain populations or experiences, photographic archives constructed an incomplete version of history that privileges the dominant narratives. The absence of these images leaves gaps in collective memory, making it harder to understand the full complexity of social, political, and economic life. The recovery and study of rare images, therefore, is not merely an academic exercise, it is a moral and cultural imperative to recognize those who were historically silenced or overlooked. By examining the lives of the invisible majority through photography, we gain insight into the broader dynamics of power, representation, and social control. These images reveal resilience, creativity, and agency in the face of marginalization, offering a counterpoint to the curated narratives that dominated mainstream media. They also challenge contemporary viewers to reconsider what has been omitted from public consciousness, prompting critical reflection on how historical narratives are constructed and whose voices are amplified or silenced. In sum, the lives of marginalized communities, minorities, refugees, women, and laborers, were systematically hidden or misrepresented in 20th-century photography. While iconic images of leaders, celebrities, or staged events dominated the historical record, these groups were often absent, distorted, or framed to serve prevailing social and political agendas. The discovery and study of rare, unpublished, or overlooked photographs allow us to recover these hidden histories, revealing the complex realities of everyday life and challenging the myths perpetuated by curated imagery. By acknowledging the invisible majority, we gain a fuller, more nuanced understanding of the 20th century and the power of photography to both conceal and illuminate human experience. Even beyond politics, war, and social inequality, the 20th century was full of images that exposed hidden truths about daily life, culture, and technology, photographs that revealed realities deliberately obscured or rarely discussed. These rare and sometimes shocking images often contradicted the comforting narratives presented in mainstream media, showing societies as complex, contradictory, and sometimes brutal. From hidden labor practices to unconventional social behaviors, these photographs captured aspects of human life that were usually invisible to the public, challenging accepted myths and forcing viewers to confront uncomfortable truths. Industrialization, for instance, transformed everyday life in ways that were frequently obscured in photography. Factories, offices, and urban construction sites became symbols of progress and modernity, often photographed to emphasize order, efficiency, and productivity. Yet behind these images were harsh realities: workers enduring grueling hours, exposure to toxic materials, and unsafe conditions that left lasting physical and psychological scars. Rare photographs, discovered in archives or private collections, reveal the exhaustion etched on workers' faces, the overcrowded and hazardous workspaces, and the improvisations they made to survive long days. These hidden images provide a stark counterpoint to the polished depictions of industrial progress, exposing the human cost behind technological and economic achievements. Urban life presents another striking example. While postcards and newspapers frequently depicted orderly streets, bustling markets, and happy citizens, other photographs reveal the chaos, squalor, and inequality lurking in the same cities. Alleyways crowded with the homeless, children scavenging for food, and families living in makeshift dwellings were rarely photographed for public consumption. Even when these images existed, editors often cropped or altered them to maintain a narrative of civic order and prosperity. The contrast between curated and hidden images exposes the selective storytelling inherent in photography, reminding viewers that daily life was rarely as idyllic as public imagery suggested. Photography also uncovered unusual social behaviors and subcultures that mainstream media preferred to ignore or misrepresent. From underground nightlife and experimental art movements to protests, countercultural gatherings, and unconventional lifestyles, these images document the vibrancy and diversity of societies often hidden behind a veneer of respectability. Many of these photographs remained unseen for decades, preserved in personal albums, archives, or forgotten collections, only to resurface later and challenge conventional understandings of social norms. They reveal that beneath the surface of daily life, societies were far more complex, creative, and sometimes chaotic than widely believed. Even seemingly mundane aspects of life were manipulated to convey specific messages. Photographers often staged scenes of domesticity, education, and leisure to promote social ideals, moral behaviors, or political agendas. Families were photographed in tidy homes, children in neat uniforms, and citizens engaging in approved forms of recreation, all designed to suggest stability, morality, and prosperity. Rare candid images, however, show a different reality: households struggling with poverty, overcrowded classrooms, and leisure activities that deviated from prescribed norms. These hidden photographs highlight the tension between lived experience and curated imagery, illustrating how visual media shaped social perception while concealing complexity and contradiction. Technological innovation also played a role in both concealing and revealing hidden truths. Advancements in photography allowed for manipulation in the darkroom, retouching of negatives, and selective framing, giving photographers unprecedented control over what was presented to the public. While these techniques enabled propaganda and myth-making, they also inadvertently captured moments of truth, unintended expressions, background details, and overlooked subjects that hinted at realities beyond the staged narrative. The careful study of such photographs can reveal hidden layers of meaning, offering a glimpse into the untold stories of the 20th century. In addition, photographs documenting disasters, accidents, and crises often reveal hidden human experiences. Public images emphasized heroism, order, and successful responses, yet rare or suppressed images show fear, chaos, and suffering that were deliberately excluded. Children orphaned by war, families displaced by industrial accidents, and communities devastated by natural disasters were often absent from official narratives, leaving their struggles invisible to the wider world. These hidden images remind viewers that history is not solely composed of heroic or sanitized moments; it is also defined by hardship, resilience, and the unseen human stories behind the events. The power of these photographs lies not only in what they show but also in what they conceal. Every image is a product of choices: what to include, what to exclude, and how to frame reality. By analyzing both mainstream and rare images together, historians and viewers can reconstruct a more nuanced understanding of society, uncovering the hidden tensions, contradictions, and complexities that characterized everyday life. In doing so, photography becomes both a window into the past and a mirror reflecting the intentions of those who controlled its dissemination. Rare photographs also reveal the intersection of human creativity and resilience. Art, music, fashion, and innovation were often documented in ways that challenged societal norms, yet these images were frequently overlooked in mainstream media. Personal collections, underground publications, and forgotten archives preserve glimpses of experimentation, eccentricity, and rebellion that were invisible to the broader public. By studying these photographs, we can appreciate the full spectrum of human experience during the 20th century, from conformity to creativity, from hardship to ingenuity. Ultimately, these hidden images serve as a reminder that history is never fully captured by official records or curated photographs alone. They challenge viewers to look beyond the surface, question accepted narratives, and consider the stories left untold. By uncovering the realities hidden behind the staged, sanitized, or selective images of daily life, photography reveals the rich, complex, and often uncomfortable truths that define human experience. These images expose the gap between perception and reality, inviting a deeper understanding of the past and the mechanisms by which societies control and manipulate what is seen and unseen. Photography in the 20th century often served as a tool to construct mythologies around public events, cultural movements, and national identity, but a closer look reveals that many of these images concealed far more than they revealed. Rare and hidden photographs, those that escaped editorial curation or censorship, provide a starkly different perspective, exposing contradictions, overlooked stories, and realities deliberately obscured. These images force us to confront the tension between the history presented to the public and the untold experiences that shaped societies, offering a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the century. Political events, in particular, were carefully curated to project unity, stability, and progress, yet rare photographs frequently reveal disorder, dissent, and complexity. Elections, public speeches, and rallies were staged to show large, enthusiastic crowds, orderly conduct, and harmonious participation, often masking the divisions, protests, or political tensions that existed just out of frame. Behind the polished imagery, opponents, skeptics, and marginalized voices were frequently absent, their presence deliberately excluded. These omissions reveal the ways in which photography was used not merely to record events, but to construct a visual narrative aligned with political objectives. By examining unpublished or overlooked images, we gain insight into the true dynamics of these events, including the resistance, conflict, and uncertainty that official photographs often erased. Social movements offer another powerful example of hidden narratives. Photographs of marches, demonstrations, or labor strikes that appeared in mainstream publications often highlighted order, heroism, or ideological unity, but many images omitted moments of tension, chaos, or repression. Rare photographs preserved in private archives or local collections show the fear, exhaustion, and sometimes violent confrontations experienced by participants. These images reveal the human cost of activism and the realities of social struggle, exposing the limits of the sanitized, celebratory images presented to the broader public. In this way, photography both documented and controlled perception, shaping memory by emphasizing some truths while concealing others. Cultural movements and artistic experimentation were similarly mediated. Mainstream photography often emphasized acceptable forms of art, music, fashion, and entertainment, creating an image of society that adhered to prevailing moral and aesthetic norms. Yet underground movements, avant-garde artists, and unconventional performers were often hidden from view. Rare images capture these subcultures in ways that reveal creativity, rebellion, and resistance to dominant social structures. From jazz clubs in urban centers to experimental theater troupes, these photographs document a richness of human expression that was systematically excluded from public representation. By studying these images alongside curated, mainstream photographs, we gain a fuller appreciation for the diversity and complexity of cultural life in the 20th century. Technological and scientific advancements were also subject to selective representation. Photographs of laboratories, industrial experiments, and engineering projects often emphasized progress, innovation, and efficiency. However, many rare images reveal the challenges, failures, and human labor behind these achievements. Scientists and engineers at work in cramped, hazardous, or chaotic conditions are frequently absent from polished accounts, yet these images provide a more authentic view of the processes, setbacks, and perseverance required for innovation. By uncovering these hidden photographs, we recognize that history is not just a sequence of successes, but a complex interplay of effort, experimentation, and human ingenuity. The everyday lives of ordinary people were also frequently misrepresented in curated images. While popular photographs emphasized prosperity, civility, and social order, rare and unpublished images reveal the hardships, improvisations, and resilience that define daily existence. Families coping with economic instability, workers navigating dangerous conditions, and children finding ways to play in challenging circumstances are often absent from mainstream imagery. These photographs highlight the gap between idealized depictions of life and the lived experiences of the majority, showing that what is omitted can be just as revealing as what is included. Disasters and crises further illustrate the selective nature of photographic documentation. Mainstream images often portrayed heroism, order, and institutional competence, while hidden photographs reveal the fear, chaos, and human suffering that accompanied these events. Refugees navigating makeshift camps, families searching for lost loved ones, and communities struggling with inadequate relief efforts were frequently omitted from public representation. The contrast between curated and hidden images underscores the power of photography not just to record events, but to shape collective memory, emphasizing some narratives while suppressing others. Propaganda played an essential role in shaping public perception during the 20th century, and photography was one of the most effective tools in that arsenal. Governments, political movements, and corporate interests recognized early on that images could influence opinion more powerfully than words alone. Yet while some photographs were celebrated for their clarity, symbolism, or artistry, many others were carefully staged, edited, or entirely fabricated to convey a specific message. By examining these images closely, we uncover how photography was used to manipulate perception, construct ideological narratives, and conceal uncomfortable truths. In totalitarian regimes, for example, propaganda photography was an instrument of both power and control. Leaders were portrayed in ways that emphasized strength, moral authority, and invulnerability. Adolf Hitler's public appearances were meticulously photographed to convey dominance and charisma, while Joseph Stalin's image was carefully curated to project omnipresence and command. In some cases, photographs were altered to remove political opponents or inconvenient truths, creating the illusion of unanimity and stability. These manipulations were not accidental, they were deliberate strategies to reinforce authority and shape public perception. By controlling what people saw, these regimes could cultivate loyalty, suppress dissent, and maintain the illusion of unchallenged power. Propaganda photography was not confined to dictatorships. Democratic societies also relied heavily on imagery to mobilize public sentiment. During both World Wars, images of soldiers, battlefronts, and home front efforts were disseminated to foster patriotism, encourage enlistment, and promote support for national policies. Photographs emphasized courage, sacrifice, and resilience, often omitting fear, exhaustion, or disillusionment. Even in these contexts, selective framing and editorial control shaped perception. Victories were highlighted, failures minimized, and narratives constructed to align with governmental objectives. The public consumed these images as evidence of progress and moral righteousness, rarely questioning the extent to which reality had been curated or staged. The use of photography in propaganda extended beyond politics and war into social and cultural messaging. Governments and corporations employed images to define ideals of family, health, morality, and citizenship. Photographs depicted orderly households, hardworking citizens, and morally upright communities, promoting behavior aligned with societal expectations. Rarely shown were the hardships, inequities, and struggles that underpin daily life, creating a sanitized version of society. These curated images shaped social norms, influencing public perception of what was acceptable, desirable, or normal, while concealing complexity and conflict. Even when images were not overtly staged, context and presentation could transform ordinary photographs into propaganda. Captions, publication placement, and selective cropping were tools used to direct interpretation. A street protest, for example, could be framed as chaotic and threatening or as a demonstration of civic engagement, depending on the editorial choices surrounding the image. By controlling context, propagandists manipulated meaning, emphasizing certain narratives while suppressing others. The subtlety of these techniques demonstrates how visual media can influence perception without altering the image itself. Technological developments further amplified the power of propaganda photography. Photographic retouching, composite imagery, and darkroom manipulation allowed propagandists to enhance desired effects, remove inconvenient details, and create compelling illusions. Leaders appeared taller, more commanding, or more charismatic, rallies seemed larger and more enthusiastic than they were, disasters or failures could be minimized or concealed entirely. These techniques highlight the dual nature of photography as both documentation and construction, revealing that every image carries layers of intention beyond what the eye perceives. Propaganda photography also intersected with mass media, shaping not only immediate perception but long-term historical memory. Iconic images, widely circulated in newspapers, magazines, and exhibitions, became embedded in collective consciousness. They defined how societies remembered wars, political movements, and cultural events, creating myths that persisted long after the original context had faded. Yet the curated nature of these images means that history itself was mediated through ideology, and many perspectives were deliberately suppressed. Rare, previously unpublished, or rediscovered photographs challenge these dominant narratives, exposing the complexity and contradiction that official imagery often obscured. The psychological effect of propaganda photography was profound. By repeatedly exposing audiences to carefully constructed images, governments and media reinforced emotional and cognitive associations, loyalty with heroism, leadership with moral authority, and social order with stability. These images shaped not only understanding but behavior, influencing decisions, allegiances, and beliefs. The power of repetition and curated visual messaging ensured that propaganda was effective even without explicit coercion, subtly embedding ideology into everyday perception. Yet studying these photographs today offers both revelation and caution. They remind us that the visual record, no matter how iconic or widely accepted, is never purely objective. Every image is mediated by choices about framing, editing, and dissemination, often reflecting the interests of those in power. By analyzing propaganda photography alongside rare, hidden, or alternative images, historians and viewers can reconstruct a more nuanced understanding of the 20th century, seeing both the myths that were created and the realities that were suppressed. The study of propaganda photography also underscores the enduring tension between appearance and reality. While images could inspire, motivate, or reassure, they could equally deceive, mislead, and manipulate. Beyond propaganda and staged images, another crucial aspect of 20th century photography lies in the documentation of everyday life, the seemingly mundane moments that reveal the texture, contradictions, and hidden realities of society. While official media often focused on extraordinary events, iconic figures, or curated narratives, many photographers turned their attention to the ordinary, capturing street scenes, domestic life, marketplaces, and leisure activities. These photographs, often overlooked at the time, provide invaluable insights into how people actually lived, worked, and interacted, offering a counterpoint to the sanitized or ideological depictions that dominated public imagery. Urban environments, in particular, offer a rich field for this hidden history. While postcards and newspapers frequently portrayed orderly streets, grand public buildings, and thriving commercial districts, candid or unpublished photographs reveal a more complex reality. Alleyways crowded with vendors, children playing in hazardous conditions, and informal settlements nestled alongside gleaming boulevards illustrate the social and economic disparities that were otherwise invisible. These images demonstrate that public narratives of progress, civility, and prosperity often mask the struggles and improvisations of ordinary citizens. By studying such photographs, historians and viewers can gain a fuller understanding of the diversity, ingenuity, and resilience that characterize daily urban life. Domestic life also provides revealing contrasts between curated imagery and reality. Advertisements, magazines, and official publications often presented families living in clean, well-ordered homes, enjoying leisure time in a controlled and aesthetically pleasing environment. Yet rare photographs, personal albums, and unpublished collections tell a different story: overcrowded rooms, improvised furnishings, and families navigating economic hardship. Children worked alongside parents, neighbors shared scarce resources, and domestic chores were often grueling and unglamorous. These candid images challenge the idealized representations of home life, highlighting both the difficulties and the creative solutions people employed to survive and thrive in often challenging conditions. Marketplaces, public transport, and workplaces similarly reveal hidden layers of society. Photographs of bustling markets capture not only trade but also social networks, informal economies, and community support systems that mainstream media often ignored. Images of workers in factories, construction sites, or offices illustrate both industriousness and the strain, danger, and exploitation that accompanied labor during the century. Even seemingly mundane activities, waiting for a tram, queuing for rations, or sharing a meal, offer insights into social hierarchies, cultural norms, and the everyday negotiations of public space. These photographs document ordinary life with a level of authenticity that challenges the polished and ideological narratives prevalent in mainstream media. Cultural and leisure activities further enrich this hidden record. While official photography often emphasized sanctioned forms of entertainment or nationalized culture, candid and rare images reveal diverse expressions of creativity, recreation, and identity. Children playing unconventional games, teenagers experimenting with fashion, informal music performances, and underground art exhibitions all highlight aspects of human experience that were invisible in curated imagery. These photographs provide evidence of resilience, innovation, and agency in daily life, demonstrating that ordinary people were not merely passive subjects of history, but active participants shaping their own social and cultural realities. Technological and methodological developments in photography also contributed to the documentation of everyday life. The advent of smaller, portable cameras and faster film allowed photographers to capture candid moments with greater spontaneity, while innovations in printing and publishing enabled wider distribution. However, editorial choices continued to mediate what reached the public, meaning that many of the most revealing or uncomfortable images remained hidden in archives, personal collections, or uncirculated prints. The rediscovery of these photographs decades later allows us to see daily life in a fuller, more nuanced way, bridging the gap between public narrative and lived reality. Even the seemingly mundane can reveal profound social and political insights. Street protests, labor disputes, or community gatherings captured in everyday life photographs provide evidence of dissent, resistance, and negotiation within society. These images often escape the grand narratives of history, yet they document the ways ordinary people shaped their world, responded to oppression, and created networks of solidarity. The subtle details, expressions, gestures, clothing, and spatial arrangements offer clues to social norms, economic conditions, and cultural practices, enriching our understanding of historical experience beyond the extraordinary events that dominate textbooks. Candid photography also illuminates the private dimensions of human experience. Images of family interactions, leisure pursuits, and personal spaces reveal emotions, relationships, and coping strategies often absent from official imagery. These photographs humanize historical actors, transforming abstract statistics or public figures into relatable individuals with desires, fears, and struggles. By capturing the texture of daily life, these images challenge simplistic or heroic narratives, emphasizing the complexity and variability of human experience. Furthermore, the study of everyday life photographs underscores the interplay between visibility and invisibility in historical representation. What was left out of public imagery, poverty, domestic labor, minority communities, and informal economies, shapes perception as much as what was included. By recovering and analyzing hidden photographs, historians and viewers gain access to experiences that were deliberately obscured or marginalized. This process not only enriches historical understanding but also democratizes it, giving voice to those whose lives were otherwise invisible in the visual record. Ultimately, photographs of everyday life in the 20th century provide a bridge between myth and reality, between public narrative and lived experience. They remind us that history is not only composed of iconic events or celebrated figures, but also of ordinary moments, struggles, and innovations that define human existence. By examining these images alongside curated, staged, or propagandistic photographs, we gain a more complete understanding of society, revealing both the aspirations and hardships, the visible and invisible, that together shaped the century. In this way, the hidden visual record of everyday life becomes an essential tool for understanding history. It illuminates the resilience, creativity, and agency of ordinary people while revealing the mechanisms through which public narratives were constructed and controlled. These photographs remind us that history is lived in private as much as it is recorded in public, and that understanding the full scope of the past requires attention not only to what was shown, but to what was hidden, overlooked, or deliberately excluded. As we move toward the conclusion of our visual journey through the hidden history of the 20th century, it becomes clear that photography is far more than a neutral record of events. The images that have survived, been published, or remained hidden offer a complex, sometimes contradictory narrative of human experience. Photographs have the power to reveal, conceal, and manipulate reality, shaping both contemporary perception and historical memory. By examining the rare, unpublished, or suppressed images alongside those widely circulated, we can begin to reconstruct a fuller, more nuanced understanding of the century, a perspective that acknowledges both the celebrated and the overlooked, the heroic and the ordinary, the curated and the concealed. The power of photography lies in its duality. It documents reality while also shaping perception. A single image can evoke emotion, convey authority, or define social norms, yet it can simultaneously obscure the broader context, manipulate understanding, or erase inconvenient truths. Iconic photographs of leaders, soldiers, or public events often present polished, mythologized versions of reality, while rare or hidden images reveal the complexity, struggle, and humanity that mainstream imagery omitted. By studying both, we recognize that every photograph is not only a record but also a construct, a lens through which society chooses to see, remember, and understand the world. One of the most striking lessons of hidden photography is the exposure of inequality and marginalization. Images of laborers, refugees, women, and minority communities challenge the sanitized narratives presented to the public, revealing lives defined by resilience, creativity, and often struggle. These photographs remind us that ordinary people were active participants in shaping society, navigating constraints, and asserting agency even under oppressive conditions. By focusing on these hidden experiences, we gain insight into the social dynamics, cultural practices, and political pressures that characterized the century, creating a richer, more comprehensive historical record. Photography also demonstrates the mechanisms of control and narrative construction. From editorial selection and censorship to propaganda and staged imagery, the images disseminated to the public were carefully curated to align with ideological, political, or commercial objectives. In doing so, photography became a tool of persuasion, shaping perception and influencing behavior. Iconic images of wartime heroism, industrial progress, or national unity often masked hardship, resistance, and chaos, revealing the extent to which reality was mediated by those in positions of power. The hidden photographs that have survived serve as counter-narratives, offering glimpses into the suppressed, overlooked, or inconvenient truths of history. Even in documenting everyday life, photography reflects choices about visibility and significance. Street scenes, domestic spaces, marketplaces, and leisure activities captured candidly reveal the texture of human experience, exposing the gaps between idealized depictions and lived realities. These images illuminate social networks, cultural practices, and economic strategies that are often absent from official narratives, offering a more grounded, authentic perspective. They also remind us that the history of ordinary people is just as important as the history of leaders, events, and institutions, and that photographs, whether staged or candid, serve as crucial evidence of both. Rare or rediscovered photographs offer a particularly compelling window into the contradictions of the 20th century. They show not only hardship, inequality, and suffering, but also resilience, innovation, and creativity. Images of underground cultural movements, clandestine social gatherings, or improvised survival strategies reveal dimensions of life often omitted from mainstream records. By juxtaposing these hidden images with widely circulated photographs, we gain a sense of the full spectrum of human experience, from conformity to rebellion, from hardship to ingenuity, and from visibility to invisibility. These photographs challenge us to question official narratives, rethink assumptions, and seek a more nuanced understanding of history. The ethical and interpretive challenges of photography are also evident in this exploration. Every image is mediated by the photographer, the editor, and the context in which it is produced and viewed. Captions, framing, cropping, and placement all influence interpretation, while technological manipulation, from retouching to composite images, further shapes perception. Recognizing these factors allows us to approach historical photographs critically, understanding both their informational value and their potential to mislead or manipulate. In doing so, we develop a more sophisticated appreciation of the relationship between visual media, power, and memory. In addition, photography highlights the interplay between memory and forgetting. Images that were hidden, unpublished, or suppressed remind us that what is absent from public view is often as significant as what is visible. The discovery and study of these photographs enable historians, researchers, and viewers to recover suppressed narratives, giving voice to those whose experiences were otherwise erased. This process is essential not only for historical accuracy, but also for acknowledging the full complexity of human life and society. By attending to both presence and absence, we can construct a more balanced, inclusive, and truthful account of the past. Finally, photography teaches us that history is never a single, unified story. It is composed of layers, perspectives, and contradictions, each mediated by choices about visibility, interpretation, and dissemination. Hidden and rare photographs reveal the lives, struggles, and creativity of ordinary people, while widely circulated images reflect the power structures, ideologies, and aspirations of society. Together, these photographs form a mosaic of human experience, challenging simplified narratives and reminding us of the richness, complexity, and diversity of history.